Today's topic, we actually started this afternoon, but many of you aren't here. So I'll give a little summary of what we did in the earlier session, and then we'll continue. The topic is remain in Bhavamuka. This was a phrase that Sri Ramakrishna heard in some ecstatic state on 3 different occasions, and the third time that he heard it was the one that's most significant. This was when he was towards the very end of that long stay in the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi, when he had received his sannyas initiation from Totapuri. And after Totapuri left, after he had spent 11 months there in Dakshineswar with Sri Ramakrishna, and then he learned what he had to learn, and he left, and then Sri Ramakrishna felt that he wanted to go back into that state and remain in that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And he did for 6 months. Now, when we say that he was in Nirvikalpa Samadhi for 6 months, I think it's a little bit, what shall I say, is not exactly 100% accurate, because we know that that from time to time his mind would come down a little bit lower. So I think it's a little more accurate to say that for a 6-month period he was mostly in that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. One reason why we know that he wasn't the whole time is that he remembers things that took place and told his disciples afterwards. There was a wandering sadhu who happened to come and recognized that he was in a very high state of meditation, that he was a very rare soul, that his body should be maintained, and he would take a little stick and he would hit him with the body to try to bring his mind down so there was a little body consciousness, and then he would put a little food in his mouth. Sometimes Thakur would swallow it, sometimes he couldn't. But there are other times, even when Thakur said that he was in such a state where he hardly had any consciousness of the outside world, but sometimes flies would come, his hair became matted, would sit on his head, and so he had a little bit of awareness from time to time, but the majority of the time he was completely lost to the world. So we can say more or less he remained in that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi for 6 months. This is something that is not supposed to happen. And according to him, the state that he entered into is a state from which most people will not be able to bring their mind back down again, that the body will only last for 21 days and the body will fall off. And the main reason why he was able to come down from that state was not because he himself willed to, but he heard the voice of the Divine Mother saying, Ore tui bhavamukita. And he heard it twice on this occasion. There was another occasion he heard it 3 times. And then there was the third occasion he heard it once. This was the final, the last of the 3 times that he heard it. Swami Atmajnananda says in this case that it was just the voice that he heard. Earlier he actually had a vision one was a vision of a golden complexion person with a long beard who's seated, we don't know who it was. The other, he says, Parati's mother. We don't know who she was exactly, some devotee there. But in this particular case, he only heard the words, Shariri Bani, with this bodiless voice. He heard it say, this remain in Bhavamuka. So this was the indication to Sri Ramakrishna that to remain in that nirvikalpa state, that he wasn't meant for that. This bhavamukha state is a state that's where the mind comes down slightly and remains at this in-between area, where looking in one direction, then one sees the infinite absolute and can become merged in that. But looking in the other direction, one sees this world not as we see this world, but as a manifestation of Brahman, or infused with consciousness, or the embodiment of bliss, or the Divine Mother herself. And this is what Ramakrishna called the state of vijnana. So getting to the roof, getting to that state where everything else disappears, only Brahman exists, one is merged in that. This is the highest state of knowledge. But this vijnana, he explained, is a very special type of knowledge wherein one sees the whole universe as divine, one sees God dwelling within all beings, and he remained in that state. There are two different levels to this. One is that he would see that what we call inanimate objects, that these were also chinmaya. He saw these as chinmaya, chidghana. He used this expression also. This chidghana is kind of congealed consciousness. So he saw everything made of the same ultimate reality, the same way that he said there's artificial fruit that's made of wax. One looks like an apple, like a banana, like a pear, but they're all the same substance. So he saw everything, what we call the physical things, he saw as some manifestation of Brahman, but each and every individual he saw as God himself. Or sometimes he would say, every male form I see is Rama, every female form I see is Sita. Or sometimes he would say, I see God alone dwelling within all beings. There's a very beautiful scene in Kashipur when Latu is sitting there like this, and Thakur looks at him and says, you see Latu sitting there with his chin on his hand. I see it Rama alone sitting there with his chin on his like that. So that was the state that he remained in. Either he would go up to that higher state, and where he would be merged, the world would disappear for him, or he would come down to a slightly lower state, and he saw everything as divine. So this is that bhavamukha state, where one direction he's on the threshold of merging and can merge with the absolute, and the other, he's facing the other direction, he sees everything as divine. Now there are so many teachings, in fact practically all of the teachings, especially original teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, can be traced back directly to this kind of double experience that he had. One is where everything merged for him, nothing exists but God, but Brahman. And the other is coming down to the world and having everything look different. Because the climbing up to the roof on the ladder is one thing. When we come back down again from the roof, even though we'll be on the same rung, on the one we haven't reached the roof yet. Our vision of the world is different, our attitude is different. There's an analoma viloma, he uses this language. Coming back down after we've had that experience, it's not the same. Everything has changed that way. So we'll find that almost all of the original teachings, or the teachings that Thakur gave emphasis to, either come out of this experience, this kind of dual experience, or were confirmed by it. See, part of what Sri Ramakrishna did was he confirmed the truth of the teachings of the scriptures. He confirmed the validity of all the spiritual sadhanas. He didn't have to do things original, because these are things that were very ancient truths that were discovered. So it wasn't necessary for him to say, I've marked out a new path. He didn't have to do anything like that. But he gave us faith that in the present age these things are also authentic and genuine and valid. But he also had experiences that went beyond anything that we read about in the past. So he used to say that the experiences of this place are beyond the Vedas and Vedanta. In all humility, he said. So what I wanted to do was go through some of these very special teachings that we find that can be directly related to this Bahalamukha state, or this Vijnana state, we can say. It's almost another way of saying it. The term Bahalamukha is something that, well, we don't find in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We get this mostly from the Leela Prasango, the great master, Sri Ramakrishna, the great master, and Swami Shankarananda has long sections about it. He finds this extremely significant, and the fact that the Thakur heard the voice of the Divine Mother, because in that state there's no one to bring the mind back down. It has to come down, it has to be pulled down by some outside force. So the Divine Mother is there. So we'll see this Vijnana state is something very, very special. Sri Ramakrishna explains it both from the point of view of jnana and from the point of view of bhakti. So so many of the teachings we'll see come directly out of this. So I want to start with this idea of Kundalini. You know, Sri Ramakrishna, he was very familiar and very much at home in all the different spiritual traditions. He came from a Vaishnava family, but they were the Vaishnava family that were worshippers of Rama. This was the tradition that he grew up in. But he was in his village of Kamarpukur, was not one of these villages as all the Vaishnava village or Shaktiva. There were all other temples there and wandering sadhus there, so he was at home in all different traditions. And then of course, when he went to the Dakshineshwar temple garden, he became a great devotee of Mother Kali. And that relationship of the child to the mother was his, we can say, default setting, that he would do all the other spiritual practices. As soon as it was done, he would go back to that. So that was the one that he was most at home with. So he came from this Vaishnava tradition, but he was very much at home in this, with this Shakta philosophy. And actually, what we call the state of Vijnana, where we see everything as a manifestation of the Divine Mother, is one of the teachings that we have. So if we want to make a distinction between our Advaita Vedanta and this Shakta philosophy, it won't be so much the nature of the individual soul and all of that. It'll be, how do we look upon this world? How do we look upon Maya? Before God realization, we negate everything. There's a Maya as an obstacle. Afterwards, we see it as the glory and manifestation of Mother. And everything is real after that. You know, Swami Turiyananda, who was considered to be one of the great Advaitins among the direct disciples, one of the final statements he made on his deathbed was, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam. We're used to Brahma Satyam, Jagat Mithya. That is, Brahman is real and this world is unreal. But he also had that Vijnana vision, that way, that this world is real because it's the glory of Mother, that way. And we'll see Sri Ramakrishna had his own understanding of this idea of the falseness of the world. Another one of his very nice teachings that we'll get to. Anyhow, we're starting with this Kundalini, which is part of this Shakta or Tantric tradition, that there is a spiritual power that lies dormant at the base of the spine, that gets awakened in the ordinary life. This remains in the lower chakras, and as we progress in spiritual life, and as the mind goes to higher and higher levels, this raises up until the state of illumination, this divine power reaches the head. So the Shakti this is the human manifestation of Shakti within this individual body, but really the Shakti is the direct power of the Divine Mother. So the same power which projects this whole universe is the power which allows us to have this higher realization, which is thought of in terms of the union of Shiva and Shakti. Shiva dwelling at the top, the divine power rising all the way up till we have that state of union, and then samadhi. Then we go into that state of oneness. So for Sri Ramakrishna, Kundalini was something very real. He spoke about it, but he didn't speak about it as real in the sense of physiologically real. This is an interesting thing, that he talked about the love body and the spirit body and exists that way. But Swamiji, who we would think wouldn't give so much of a realistic interpretation of Kundalini, he said no, because from a physiological point of view, if you do a bisection of the spinal cord and all of that, you'll see that there's a kind of figure eight configuration that goes up, and Ida Pingala and the two sides, and there's a space right in the middle for the Sushumna that will go up, and that I don't know if it's true, or doctors can tell us, that there are these nerve centers, plexus centers, that correspond more or less to the chakras of Kundalini. So he gave a little bit of a physiological interpretation. But the point is more that the mind can rise to different levels, and we have a different experience of so-called reality, of this external phenomenal universe, depending on the level of the mind. We exist on this one particular level, and we function through the senses as they are, and we assume this is the only way of seeing the world, and that when we see objects, we see them as they really are. If we don't see them very clearly, we put glasses on, and then we can see them very clearly. But if we don't have our glasses, we say, well, it's because my eyes need a little prescription so that I'll see things very clearly. But if we stop and think that our perception of the world is so dependent on the nature of our senses and the way the senses work. If there were no creatures with eyes at all, would we even think about what objects look like? Right? We wouldn't even think about that. If our senses worked in a different way. There's so many things out there. Swamiji says that suppose instead of sense of sight we had the sense that we could see electricity. The world would look completely different. So even from this relative point of view, what we take to be a very hard-cold objective reality is very much dependent on the nature of our senses and our understanding. But the Kundalini idea is that in order to have some type of spiritual experience, the mind goes to a different level where perhaps we don't see this universe anymore. Everything will be light that way. We talk about, say, in meditation, we try to picture the image of the chosen ideal, the Ishtadevata, and we find that we can't do it with this ordinary mind. Maybe we get a little glimpse, maybe we'll see the hands or the feet or the face for a fleeting moment, something like that, and we think it's impossible to do it. It is impossible to do it with the mind in the present state that it's in. When we hear about these people who have some type of bhava, ecstatic experience or something, it means the mind is raised to a higher level where these things are possible. You may remember that I think it was Ramlal. Was it Ramlal? On Kalpataru Day, when Thakur touched everybody and he gives the description. He says, formerly in my meditation I could see a portion of my Ishtadevata. When I saw the feet, I didn't see the hands. When I saw the hands, I didn't see the face. But as soon as Thakur touched me, I saw glowing and before me, so it was clear and everything. So it's not a question of learning to concentrate the mind, where the mind actually goes to a higher level, which according to this model means that it's gone to a higher chakra, that the Kundalini has been raised. It's not so much that the experience is the result of the Kundalini going up. We can say a bit more that through our devotion, through our love, through our spiritual practices, we're able to raise the mind, and correspondingly Kundalini goes up. These two things happen together. Cause and effect is a curious thing. When the two things happen at the same time, we don't know exactly what causes what. So I think Kundalini a little bit like the mercury inside the thermometer. Is it that the mercury is causing it to get hot out? When the mercury goes up, we're making it hot out. Because it's hot, the mercury goes up. Right? When the rooster crows at dawn, and the sun comes up. Right? Is it because the rooster crows? If the rooster doesn't crow, the sun won't come up. No. So this cause and effect is a curious thing that way. Sri Ramakrishna is so intelligent. He understood these things in such a clear manner. He gives that beautiful illustration. It's a little off the point, but of Ahalya and the sage that when Ahalya thought that Indra came in the form of her husband, she didn't know it, and when the husband came back, he was furious, and he cursed her that she'll turn into a stone pillar, something like that. Then he found out that it wasn't really her fault, and he said, oh, then what to do, how to release this curse? And he said, Treta Yuga, Rama will come and touch you, and then you'll be released from that. So everything happened that way, and then Sri Ramakrishna said, but tell me, was she released from that because of the touch of Rama, or because of the words of the sage? So, is it because Kundalini rises that we have a higher experience, or through our grace of God or austerities, the mind goes up, correspondingly Kundalini goes up. Anyhow, they work together somehow that way. So Sri Ramakrishna spoke about this Kundalini in connection with spiritual awakening many, many times. He said, the Kundalini, when awakened, passes through the lower centers and comes to the Anahata, which is at the heart. It stays there. At that time, the mind of the aspirant is withdrawn from the three lower centers. He feels the awakening of divine consciousness and sees light. In mute wonder, he sees that radiance and cries out, what is this? What is this? After passing through the 6 centers, the Kundalini reaches the 1,000-petaled lotus known as the Sahasrara, and the aspirant goes into Samadhi. The center, known as Vishuddha, is the 5th plane. The center is at the throat and has a lotus with 16 petals. When the Kundalini reaches this plane, the devotee longs to talk and hear only about God. So the mental attitude changes with all of these. Conversation on worldly subjects causes him great pain. He leaves a place when people talk of these matters. Then comes the 6th plane, corresponding to the center known as Ajna. The center is located between the eyebrows, and it has a lotus with 2 petals. When the Kundalini reaches it, the aspirant sees the form of God. So this means that it's not this ordinary mind. It's the mind that has to be raised to a different level. Sees the form of God, but still there remains a slight barrier between the devotee and God. It is like a light inside a lantern. You may think you have touched the light, but in reality you cannot because of the barrier of glass. And last of all is the 7th plane, which according to Tantra is the center of the 1,000-petaled lotus. When the Kundalini arrives there, the aspirant goes into Samadhi. In that lotus dwells Satchidananda, Shiva, the Absolute. There, Kundalini, the awakened power, unites with Shiva. This is known as the union of Shiva and Shakti. The reason why this Kundalini is important in this context is that Sri Ramakrishna says that the state of Bhavamuka is the state between the 6th and 7th planes. And that's where he dwelled after that. He lived in that very rare atmosphere where either he would be merged in oneness or he would see everything as divine. So there's a state of awareness that comes where we no longer see objects as object. We'll still see them as object. We'll be able to recognize them. But we see everything as Chinmaya. We'll see everything as the embodiment of consciousness. We may reach a state where we see everything as light. We may reach a state where everything disappears. And this is that state just before the mind goes into samadhi. We read so many illustrations of this in Vivek Churamani. The disciple says, "Oh, where did the universe go? It was just here a moment ago, now it's gone. What a strange thing has happened." And Swamiji, before he went into a samadhi, said, "Oh, what's happening? You notice everything is whirling around and disappearing." So it depends on the state of mind. Thakur, that same experience. Everything, he saw everything disappearing before his eyes, even with eyes open. So this proves, on some level, that consciousness alone is the real substance. Everything else is contingent. Or experience of this external world is contingent on what level the mind is at and how the senses are functioning. So, if we reach a state where everything seems to disappear, to swirl around and everything, it's not a false state, it's not a hallucination or anything. It's equally real, maybe more real. When we reach that state, then we start to question the reality of this state as our ultimate experience. We won't necessarily say, well, it's just a dream, it's all made up or anything, but we'll no longer have that feeling that this is the only way this world can be experienced. That it's very much contingent on the nature of our senses. Now, one of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings, though, is that when mind goes to this higher level, we have that type of experience, everything is changed forever. We may come down, we may still live in this world of objects, but our vision will be completely changed. So, for Sri Ramakrishna, his mind could come down to that level where everything is divine, but he couldn't go below it. So this is that divine state where there's no chance anymore of being attached to the world, because we see everything as divine. So he explained this in terms of his Kundalini, and this is that Bhavamukha state, or that state of Vijnana that Thakur lived in. This state between the sixth plane of the Kundalini and the 1,000-petaled lotus at the top of the head. So this is one of the most important teachings of Sri Ramakrishna, that everything depends upon our state of awareness, the level of consciousness, or the state of our mind. There's nothing so objective out there. And it can be explained in terms of the Kundalini. From a devotional point of view, it could be explained in terms of Bhava, Mahabhava, Prema, all of these different spiritual states, the highly devotional states. This also depends on Kundalini, and we'll see that many of the same teaching, there are almost parallel teachings. Whether Sri Ramakrishna talks in the terms of Jnana Yoga, the things disappearing, we see everything as pure consciousness that way, or sometimes he'll talk in terms of devotional schools, the different levels of bhava, different levels. There's also Kundalini, as it rises, we'll enter into Mahabhava, Prema, all of these different levels that way. So this goes to this other great teaching, that this distinction between jnana and vijnana. And we can almost say that what Sri Ramakrishna does is that he takes the teachings of Advaita Vedanta, which he appreciates and accepts provisionally. This is a very, very unusual thing. Generally, we find that either you like it or you don't like it. That if those philosophers who don't like this idea that this world is false and that there's no difference between the individual soul and the supreme soul, that they'll argue against it or they'll accept it. Now, Sri Ramakrishna, he said that this belief that this world is something false, this belief that there's some Maya at play, this practice of discrimination where we go through the 1880 path, where we say that anything that's changing is unreal, anything that can be perceived is ultimately unreal, that he said this is a very valid way of doing a spiritual practice. He says this path of 1880 is for the sake of sadhana. This is in order for us to get to the roof. He doesn't say it's a final truth. He says when we get to the roof, then because we're merged in Brahman, because the mind is to a higher level, this world disappears. If it's real, it'll remain, but this world disappears at that point because the mind is on that level. When the mind comes down to a slightly lower level, this is where that vijnana comes in. Then we see this world as something real. So he accepts the unreality of the world as a provisional philosophical position to take in order for us to be able to isolate the real self. Because now we're confusing the self with the mind and the personality and the ego and all of that, which are constantly changing. And we have no way to access that ultimate reality other than peeling away all of the things that don't belong to it. But ultimately we find that what we've discarded, we again accept. Yeah. So this is, he also says this is the process of negation and affirmation. First we negate everything, then after that we affirm that. This is why Sri Ramakrishna used the terminology that he used. If you go through, look at the language that he used. It's very interesting that this process of discrimination, sometimes he'll say sat, asat, real and unreal, we can say. But immediately he'll clarify it. He'll say, what is the real? He'll say Brahman alone is real. What is asat? Anitya, that which is transitory. Sometimes he'll say vastu and avastu. But he doesn't like this mithya. We don't find him using that at all. That it's false, that it's like a dream. Very often he'll say, I don't like to call this world unreal like a dream. But he accepts it. He accepts it as a very valid spiritual attitude for certain people. That's why he'll tell the story about the farmer who's the jnani, who loses the 7 sons because he wakes up from the dream. So it's not that he doesn't accept it, but he doesn't accept it as a final position. That's the thing. And it's not his spiritual attitude. So he doesn't say that I don't believe the world is unreal like a dream. He says I don't like to think of the world as unreal like a dream. We were talking about this earlier, this idea that the belief system is based on, to a large extent, what appeals to us. Because we know our belief system is not absolute. Our belief system is a vehicle. This is the Joto Matatopa. That's also just a path that we follow. There's nothing that we have to accept as unchallengeable. Because we're only trying to get to the roof. Doesn't matter how we do it. And after we get there, we realize that people can go by other paths. They don't have to accept ours. And leave that. So, the language that Thakur uses is Nitya and Leela. So he doesn't say this world is unreal. He says it's like a play. Like this divine play, divine sport. We shouldn't take it too seriously. So he likes this idea also of the world is transitory. There's nothing to hold on to. It's constantly changing, that idea. So this was more his attitude. But after this process of negation, then the attitude changes. And we can see everything is divine. We have no fear of attachment. The main reason why we talk about this world as being unreal is that we're to break that attachment. We're too attached to it. It doesn't have to be seen as a very hard and fast philosophical position, the unreality of the world. So Sri Ramakrishna doesn't take it that way. He takes it as a provisional position that we take in order to progress in spiritual life, to get to the roof, and then after that, when we come back down again, everything looks a little different. So he says, in the beginning, when one reasons following the Vedanta method of not this, he realizes that Brahman is not the living beings, not the universe, not the 24 cosmic principles. All these things become like dreams to him. Then comes the affirmation of what has been denied, and he feels that God himself has become the universe and all living beings. First of all, you must discriminate following the method of 1880. So he accepts that on the path of knowledge. He is not the five elements, not the sense organs, not the mind, nor the intelligence, nor the ego. He is beyond all these cosmic principles. But we can say also, I am beyond. We're doing this for the self. You want to climb to the roof? Then you must eliminate and leave behind all the steps one by one. The steps are by no means the roof. But after reaching the roof, you find that the steps are made of the same material, brick, lime, and brick dust, as the roof. It is the Supreme Brahman that has become the universe and its living beings and the 24 cosmic principles. So, Sri Ramakrishna did not reject this Advaitic position. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya, Brahman is real and the world is unreal, but he accepted it as something that we can utilize at the time of the sadhana to isolate the real self from its coverings, which are hiding it from us, not as a final position, a provisional position. Very interesting how he was able to reconcile all of that, all of these things. And if we want to come up with more of a final position, it'll be this Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma, that everything we see is nothing but Brahman itself. In that way. See, we have two ways of looking at it. If we use the snake and the rope example. When we see a snake, we can say, well, the snake is unreal, or we can say, well, I'm not seeing it correctly, but what I'm really seeing Brahman. I'm seeing the rope, thinking that it's a snake. So we don't want to discard the whole thing. See, there's no way to discard the snake without discarding the rope. This is the problem. If we go up to that, what we think is a snake, and we cut it in half, we've ruined a good piece of rope. Right? What we want to get rid of is our false idea that it's a snake. And then we see that the snake was nothing but this rope manifesting itself in a particular way. But because of our poor understanding, it was the cause of fear. And now we see let it manifest in any way it wants. It's nothing but the manifestation of Brahman. So this is what he called this anuloma viloma, or affirmation and negation. Now this brings us again back to this idea of vijnana. When we come back down afterwards, there are other things that happen. It's not just that we see everything as divine. For the followers of the devotional path, we'll see some other tremendous things happen. He says, jnana is the realization of the self through the process of neti, not this. One goes into samadhi through this process of elimination and realizes the Atman. But vijnana means knowledge with a greater fullness. Some have heard of milk, some have seen milk, some have drunk milk. He who has merely heard of it is ignorant, ajnana. He who has seen it is a jnani, but he who has drunk it has vijnana, that is to say, a fuller knowledge of it. Then, this is the interesting part. After having the vision of God, one talks to him as if he were an intimate relative. That is vijnana. So, something else happens with this coming down from that state of oneness, coming down from that, when this ego that remains, another one of his teachings about the right ego, has a certain type of transparency to it. It doesn't really cause any type of separation. So we remain in some type of state of communion with the divine on a personal level also. Now, it may not be that everyone is like that, but those who follow the devotional path, he says in many places that you can talk to God, you see God, talk to God on some personal level. How did he know this? Because he lived in that state. He had the constant vision of the Divine Mother, and he felt that everything he heard, this was her voice. She was telling him, directing him at every step. That he was an instrument and she was the operator of that instrument. He lived in that state. So he had the authority to say all of this. Now, if we think of this, again, this process of going up to the roof and the different stages there, this also helps explain how Sri Ramakrishna could integrate and synthesize and remove all contradiction between the different schools of Vedanta. The dualistic school, the qualified non-dualistic, and the non-dualistic schools. We can see this corresponding to either different levels of the mind. At a certain level, we live in a dualistic state. I'm separate, you're separate, we see everything separate. A little bit higher, we feel a part of everything. And then the higher state, Kundalini goes all the way up, then we live in that state of oneness. So from this point of view, there's no contradiction between them, because we're experiencing the world in different ways when the mind is on a different level of awareness, that's all. And, Sri Ramakrishna always went back to the statement of Hanuman, when Rama asked him, how do you look upon me? And he said, it depends. He said, when I feel myself identified with the body, then I'm your servant. You're the master and I'm your servant. That means Kundalini is a certain level, or we're at a certain level of the steps going up. That's my spiritual attitude. Goes a little bit higher, and I have this feeling that I'm Jiva. Then I feel that I'm a part. You're the whole and I'm a part of you. But when I go all the way to the top, when I have that Atmavati, when I feel that I'm nothing but the self alone, then you and I are one and the same. No distinction whatsoever. And then he says, this is my final and most mature opinion. This is my nishtita mati, he says. Now what does that mean? What is the final and we don't talk about that very much. Does it mean that when I have this knowledge of the Atman, you and I are one and the same? Or does it mean all of them? I think the beauty of the statement is that it means all of them. That they're all true. And when I feel that I'm your servant, there's nothing about that that's false, because that's the level of my ego. My ego sense is there that way. From that point of view, it's 100% true, and it's the best spiritual attitude that I can have, and I'm convinced that this is true. But if the mind goes a little higher, it'll change a little bit. I can even reach that state where I see no distinction between you and me. Iti me nishthitamati. So I take it as meaning, and that was Sri Ramakrishna's attitude. That for some people, on a certain level of awareness, that they'll want this attitude, servant attitude. And he used to say that really for most people, because this sense of I, he says it won't leave. It somehow keeps hanging around. We cut it down, it grows up the next day. So he says, takshala. He says, let the rascal remain as a servant of God, in that way. Then this also brings us to this idea of ego. Now, Sri Ramakrishna had this doctrine of the unripe ego and the ripe ego. Another very important thing, because in a very simplistic way, we say that the obstacle to spiritual realization is this ego. If we can get rid of this ego, then we can realize God. Then Thakur talks about it that way, of course. The ego is like a stump that grows up in front of an old house, and you can't open the door because the stump is there. We have to remove the stump, we can open the door. But he's so practical. He says, this is all true, but this ego will remain because this is the nature of human life, that will always be identified with something. So he has this concept of the unripe ego and the ripe ego. Now this ripe ego, this is another example of how we have a certain understanding on the way up to the roof and different understanding on the way down. On the way up, we adopt this ripe ego as a spiritual attitude, even though deep down we may be fully identified with the body and with our social situation, our family situation and all of that. But we adopt it as a spiritual attitude and try to convince ourselves that every time we think that I'm a particular individual, this and that, we tell our minds, no, I'm a child of the Divine Mother. I'm a child of the Divine Mother. And this is how we get to this will take us in spiritual life to the roof. After we come down, then Ramakrishna says, in order to live in the world, we have to hold on to a certain sense of I. This is the spontaneous, this is the real right ego. Ours is something we utilize as part of our spiritual practice and spiritual life. But the only way these great souls can live in the world is with some sense of I. Even Sri Ramakrishna, right? Did he have an ego? Of course he had an ego. Everyone does. If without an ego we can't talk to anybody, we have no sense of who we are. But his ego was so firmly established as the child of the Divine Mother that nothing could shake that. Sometimes this ego in him would disappear completely and he would say, I look within, Mother alone is there. Other times he would say, I look within, I see two. Mother is there, her child is there. Both ways. But in either case, this ripe ego is something which is different after this process in that state of vijnana. The state of vijnana, this I that we have is a different type. It has no power to do anything harmful. And either it's the eye of knowledge or it's the eye of devotion. And Sri Ramakrishna says that he gives two illustrations, like a burnt string. If we take a string and we take a match, we light it, then we'll see that whatever curves it had in it will remain. The powder, the ash will remain. It will look just like the string did before. It will give the appearance that there's a string there. But he said, if you blow on it, the whole thing disappears. You can't use it to tie anything. It won't bind anything. Or this steel sword, that you can kill somebody with it. You touch this philosopher's stone, Purushmani. It turns to gold. It has the same form, it looks like it, but you can't use it to hurt anyone. It's too soft metal, that way. So the God-realized soul has an ego name only, an appearance only. It doesn't have any power to harm anyone or to bind him or her, whoever the God-realized soul is. Now, all of this assumes that we can go up to the roof, which means on some level having this Nirvikalpa Samadhi experience and come back down and live in the state of Vijnana. But we have all of these teachings about the Ishvara Koti and the Jiva Koti. And this is these are two terms that we also don't find in the other traditions. I don't know where he got these from. Like the Bhavamukha, we don't find that also. We don't find that in other devotional literature or other things. And the Ishvara Koti and Jiva Koti. But Thakur makes this distinction that there are special souls that are Nitya Siddha, that they're ever perfect. They're not born into this world because of karma. They don't have to achieve their liberation that that liberation is already assumed for them, it's already guaranteed for them, but they'll come back again because they're working for the welfare of others. It's kind of bodhisattva type of ideal. And that they alone can come back from this highest state of nirvikalpa samadhi. They alone can achieve the highest states of bhava, this mahabhava and prema. Others can get as high as bhava. But there are certain things that are left for them alone. Now the problem with this is that we get to this very tricky question that are we striving to realize a state from which we won't be able to return? Not that it's a very likely thing that we'll have nirvikalpa samadhi. We shouldn't think that this is something we have to lose sleep over. Right? We can almost say this should be the biggest problem in life. Will we come back from nirvikalpa samadhi or not? But from a theoretical point of view, it's an interesting question. Is it the case that we enter into the state, if we kind of nirvikalpa samadhi, and then in 21 days the body drops off, and we remain merged with the Brahman? In that case, where is scope for the Jivan Mukta, the ever-free soul? And Sri Ramakrishna talked about that. So often he'll say, first realize God, then live in the world. This is the first thing we do. So we have to ask ourselves, well, what does it mean? Can we actually get to the roof and come back down? Then we have all of these different illustrations that he gives, which give us some glimpse of this. Say, for example, he talked about the four friends who are walking down the road, and there's a high wall, and they hear the singing and laughing and all this, a big party going on the other side, and one by one they climb up to the top of the wall, and they look over, and the first one goes, ah, how wonderful, and jumps over. Then the second one does the same thing, the third one does the same thing, the fourth friend goes up there, and before he jumps over, he thinks, let me go back and tell other people that there really is this tremendous joy on the other side of the wall, so they'll also want to come up and do it. So, to me, this means that we can climb all the way up to the roof. We can even see what's up there. We may even be able to go up there a little bit and then come back down. If we stay too long, we'll get pulled over. That's all. If we stay too long. And is it up to us? If we believe in this karma theory, that we'll only be able to stay up there once all of our prarabdha karma is gone. That way. And so Sri Ramakrishna says that many people, they'll get up there and the little desires and karma will pull them back down. So he gives the example in village boys, when they wanted to play, sometimes they would catch a mongoose. And they would build a little wall, a brick wall, and enclose it in that brick wall. And they would tie the brick to the tail of the mongoose. The mongoose would be able to climb up to a certain height to just get up to the top of the wall, and the weight of the brick would pull it back down again. Not a very nice game, but they would do that. So he said that that weight of these little, we have any desire still in the mind, even though we can get up to the top, we can have that realization, that'll pull the mind back down again. So this is one thing. And the other thing is, he says that some people, that they'll maintain a little desire for the welfare of others, they'll be able to come back down from that. Then he also gives the indication that this idea of not coming back down is only through this path of meditation. Those who go into this nirvikalpa state, but that through the path of devotion one also realizes one's oneness with the Brahman, through other paths as well. So there's no question that there's nothing that they can't come down from. They're having that highest type of realization. Then, Thakur has another theory of adhar. This adhar is a container. So it's not simply that Ishvara Koti is here, Jiva Koti is here. Even among Ishvara Kotis, some are big containers, and some are a little smaller. Among Jivas also, there'll be That means the ability to withstand spiritual emotion, the ability to do spiritual practice, the ability to have different types of realization. See, someone like Swamiji, Thakur said that he was like a huge lake. The elephant could go into that lake, it'll hardly make a ripple. Others, if a small animal goes into it, you'll see waves and splashing all over the place and everything. So, because there'll be a small adhar, small receptacle that way. So even among the Ishvara Kotis, there'll be some that will be able to withstand all of these spiritual emotions and everything better than others. So we see that Swamiji, very rarely we would see him lose his composure or anything and singing and dancing. It happened on occasion, of course, but he was such a huge adhar, this big container that way. So there is a gradation, and there's a sense in which there are some people who a little bit of spiritual emotion and a little bit of bhava and some high realization, the body can't hold it. So Thakur says it's like an elephant going into a little hut. It is that the body will be destroyed through all of that. But there are others, not even Ishvara Kotis, but others who are big receptacles. That means that they have a greater capacity to hold on to these spiritual emotions. They can have high types of realization and still live in the world after that. So there are all these different ways that we have of trying to understand these things. Then the other thing is that when we talk about Nirvikalpa Samadhi, sometimes we talk about this as a very absolute thing. And in one sense it is. Can we talk about different levels and different degrees of Nirvikalpa Samadhi if what it means is the mind is not functioning? If the mind is not functioning, it's not functioning. Right? How can there be any distinction between two people in that same state when the mind isn't functioning? It's got to be the same. Right? Theoretically. But we see even when Thakur, when we say he was 6 months in that Nirvikalpa state, that it wasn't exactly the whole time he says, well, the mind is not functioning whatsoever. So we have also this understanding that there can be very deep states of samadhi where it's very hard for the mind to come down. And Sri Ramakrishna sometimes would go into that state, it would last for a long time. Other times the mind would come down more easily from that. So if the individual can go into that state, even for a brief moment, without getting absorbed in it, when the mind can come back down, then it's done. The job is done. We've had that realization. Even to get a glimpse of the roof. This is all we need. Sri Ramakrishna talks about Shukadeva, who is considered to be, of course, the paradigm of the perfectly free soul. Even Shukadeva, that Sri Ramakrishna says that, here it is, it is said like sages like Dattatreya and Jadabharata did not return to the relative plane after having the vision of Brahman. According to some people, Shukadeva tasted only a drop of that ocean of Brahman consciousness. He saw and heard the rumbling of the waves of that ocean, but did not dive into it. So, if a few drops are enough, then we don't have to worry about anything. If we have reached the end of our karma and we dive into it, it's time for this life to be over anyhow. And we're merged in Brahman at that point. But the other thing is that we have to remember Sri Ramakrishna's teaching that it is not necessary to be fully immersed in this ocean of Brahman. And he gives the example that if you bathe in the Ganga, you'll get liberation. It doesn't mean you have to get bathed in it all the way up from Gomukh down to Ganga Sagar, wherever you go into it. So any aspect of God that we reach, any path that we get to the roof, to get a glimpse, to have a few drops of it, depending on how big our container is. This will be enough to give us realization. And there's the other question, does it mean we'll go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi and life will end and we'll be merged in that and everything? It's not a very realistic question. It's a curiosity. I used to wonder about it because he talks about it a lot. But I think we have to take it that way, that yes, if through some type of grace and all of our karma is gone, we have no desires whatsoever, we enter into that state, this is the way that we'll go from this world to the next, within that final liberation, in that state of meditation, in that state of samadhi. But it's not that by accident we'll go into samadhi and that'll be the end of our life. I don't think it'll exactly happen that way. Anyhow, these are just, some of the things, but all of these go back to this ability that Ramakrishna had to remain on that absolute, that nitya state for such a long time, come back to this lila state, to understand everything about all of the different ways that we can get to the roof. He said once you're up there, you can see that there are stairs, there are the bamboo pole, there's a rope, so many different ways, and then to be able to come back down from that and to dwell on that level where he could converse with people. He could live like an ordinary person from one point of view. Of course, he never was, and whenever he wanted, he could go back up and dwell on that very high level from which most people can't return. So this all goes back to that experience where he heard the Divine Mother say, remain in Bhavanmukha. So I'll stop here. We can have some questions if anybody would like to ask anything. Yeah.
I have two questions. One is more theoretical and you don't have to answer that one. Which is, Thakur says the body goes away in 21 days. And then I have heard, and in Thakur's was of course an avatar and Ishvara Kotis can do whatever. Should I use a microphone?
You can continue.
So, therefore, the question arises that then there are others who say that even if you got Nirvikalpa Samadhi, if your karma is remaining, the part of the karma, so you have to live the rest of your life to finish that. So I cannot reconcile all of these things.
Okay, the explanation for that second part is if we have some karma left, that will pull the mind down. We won't be able to remain in that state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi.
But I can get Nirvikalpa Samadhi.
Yes, this was my point. That we can enter it. We can get to the top of it, of the wall. And whether we can stay there long. If we stay there too long, we'll end up jumping over. How long we can stay there is also a question of do we have some karma left? Do we have still some desires? As Ramakrishna used to say that he kept a desire. Sometimes he would keep a small desire in his mind. Or say, now let me drink some water or something like that, so that he could bring the mind back down. So, if there are no desires whatsoever, and the prarabdha karma is gone, and we're not the very special soul that says, well, let me tell others about this, welfare of the world. If our prarabdha karma is gone, that means that according to the theory, the karma theory, it means whether we have Nirvikalpa Samadhi or not, we've reached the end of our life. The prarabdha means that when that's gone, that's what determines the length of life. So whether we have Nirvikalpa Samadhi or not, that's how long we'll live. So really, if we think about it, we'll only get that last 21 days if we've used up all of our karma also. So the mind has no weight, there's no brick pulling it back down anymore. And this is, our life will be over in either case. If we haven't reached that, then the karma itself will It won't allow the mind to remain that long enough in that nirvikalpa state that it gets stuck there, that there's no coming back down from it.
But there will be no rebirth, that's for sure.
Yes, there will be no...
Yeah, even
yes.
if I got it for 1 second.
Yes.
And then
this is what Thakur said with Shukadeva,
yeah.
that maybe he drank 1 or 2 drops of water, and that was enough to make him a free soul, a Jivan Mukta. Yes, so that's enough, of
There
course.
is no more rebirth. Unless I am Ishvapati or some
Yes.
helper of Avatar.
Yes. That was one question. You had 2 questions.
Yeah, that's somebody else asked.
Okay.
My question is how to overcome the egoism. That means through meditation or trusting God. I'm meditating on saints.
Yeah.
Everybody has got egoism.
Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
do you mean? I want
Yeah.
to know.
No, we had this discussion over tea today. And I suggested there are two things that we have to pay attention to. One, we have to try to analyze our present sense of ego. And we have to understand what ego means. What does it mean? Is there a real thing? Is there such a thing as an ego? Is there a structure? Is there something that's maybe not material, but something that has some independent objective reality to it? Now, in the Sankhya school, we have all our chitta and our ahankara and our buddhi and our manas. So they take ahankara as something real. In Vedanta, we don't take it that way. In Vedanta, this what we call the ego is simply whatever conception we have of who we are. Okay? So the first thing is we have to understand that when I use the term I, there's nothing absolute about it. That my understanding of who I am undergoes change constantly. From the sense of I have as a child, the sense of I as a teenager, sense of I married, career, all of these things. As an old person, it's constantly changing that way. So there's nothing absolute about it. That's the first thing. And the second thing is this sense of I that I have, is it based on anything real and permanent? Or is it based on these changing things and imaginary things? Generally, it's half imaginary things. I think I'm very handsome, I think I'm very ugly. Maybe something in between, but my sense of I, self-image, is dependent on things like that. Then, is it something that, even if it's realistic, is it something that is helpful? So then I stop and think that, what difference does it make? I'm handsome, I'm ugly, why should that make any difference to me? Then, is it something that causes bondage? And is it something that causes suffering? So, we start out with this understanding that the sense of I is fluid. The sense of I is something that can be changed. That there's nothing hard and fast about it. Then we come to the understanding that I may not be happy, that I have a very poor self-image. I think that people make fun of me, people don't like me, all of that. There's a very fragile sense of I, this ego. Then we come to the understanding that within me is something divine, something of value. If I can identify with that, have that sense of I, that'll bring great peace to me and great strength to me. If I can identify with the self within. See, Swamiji, everything about him was strength. So he said, yes, tell yourself, I am the undying, unborn self. I am the Atman. Let that be your sense of I. That's an ego. That's an ego. If I say, Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman, that's my sense of I. That's my ego. I've identified with that. It brings great strength. Suppose I'm more devotional in nature, then I like to think of God as mother, then I have to think, then I'm the child. So I identify myself with this child aspect, this relationship with mother, so my mind is constantly thinking that way. Then it eliminates all of these very harmful elements and hurtful elements of the ego. So there are all different ways of doing this. Meditation, of course, is helpful, because in meditation we can see that this ego is nothing but an idea. It's nothing but an idea. If we're thinking about it, then we have it. If we're not thinking about it, we don't have it. Yeah. There's a very nice explanation given by Ramana Maharshi. He says the ego is like an uninvited guest at a wedding. A gate crasher. So somebody goes to a wedding, and he's very uncouth, and he's very loud, and he's stuffing himself with food and putting things in his pocket and everything. And the bride family is thinking, oh, the groom must have invited him. The groom family thinks the bride. And then the two of them, they look at each other, and they say, did you invite him? No. Did you invite him? No. And then he sees he's caught, and he runs out the door. So he said like that, his ego is an uninvited guest. And once this ego knows that he's been caught, he'll disappear. He'll run away. So a very beautiful interpretation. Yeah.
I'm thinking that ego is formed because we are in such a transient world that the fear of this impermanence is always there, and maybe ego is one thing that holds a person saying, I am, because everything else is transient and impermanent. But what you're saying is that I am is okay as long as we identify it with a supreme power, with the divine.
There are many different ways of doing it. We'll have people who don't really have much belief in personal God or anything like that. They can have also a strong sense of I. That we want to build up this I. We want it to be very strong, so that we're not at the mercy of all the external things. That's the main point. If we're spiritual people and we want to think of it in terms of the divine and think in terms of false identification, all of that, well and good. But we don't have to be. There are many people in this world who just have a very good sense of themselves. That if people criticize them, they laugh. They say, yeah, you're right. I'm not very smart. I do make mistakes all the time, but it's okay, I don't mind. There are people like that. They're very good, nice type of the ego. And then there are other people, they may be very spiritual people, do a lot of spiritual practice and everything, and the first time anybody says it, how dare you say that to me? Yeah. So a lot of it is just how comfortable we are in our own shoes. This idea of the ego, that how we relate to ourselves. See, this question of ego, of course, is a big psychological question. It's not always a metaphysical thing. Of course, from a metaphysical point of view, the ego is false, and the real self is the witness, all of that. But forget about all of that. Just if we can at least feel that I am who I am, I accept myself with all my faults, it's okay. Not everyone will love me, I don't mind. Let them laugh at me, good, I'm happy.
So for non-believers, people who are not into divinity, or they're not spiritual, what advice do you give them?
See, non-believers may be spiritual people also. And I say this because we have several billion Buddhists in this world who may say, I don't believe in the self, I don't believe in God or anything, but they have that heart of compassion. They care about other people. You want to know the very best thing? I'll tell you the best thing. Be unselfish. This is Swamiji's teaching. Unselfishness is God. He says that they alone live who live for others. The rest are more dead than alive. He wrote this in a letter. He said, this life is short and the vanities are transitory, but they alone live who live for others. The rest are more dead than alive. If you want to see a happy person, find an unselfish person, a selfless person. This is the key to everything. Those people who live for others, they'll have disappointments, they'll have problems and everything, but they won't suffer the way other people suffer. And those people who have every possible thing you could want, material things and all of that, if they only care about themselves, they'll never be happy. So that selfless, the unselfish ego is a beautiful type of ego. Nobody needs to have any deep spiritual convictions or anything for that. Very practical thing. That there's a tremendous amount of joy that comes from living for others and not caring about ourselves, putting others first that way. They're the happy people. Other people may laugh at them, or say, oh, people take advantage of you, that whatever they ask you to do and everything. They say, yeah, I don't mind.
Swamiji,
Yes.
Talking about Kundalini force, it's a very dangerous thing. If it is awakened, if a person is not spiritually advanced, and in case if the Kundalini is awakened, it will be a dangerous thing. But if a person is spiritually advanced, if it gradually rises, then it's okay. And I have read there are some physical methods they can awaken the Kundalini by some type of physical exercise, and that will be very dangerous. And also I have heard some people who met with an accident and the Kundalini force is awakened when that person is spiritually not advanced. So what is your opinion in that?
Yeah, there's the second illustration that you gave. I don't know anything about that, but what you said in the beginning is 100% true. And this is why we should be very careful not to do things like excessive pranayama, which may raise the kundalini, or even they say excessive kirtan. This Swamiji was very critical of that. There's too much singing and dancing that some kundalini can rise and some bhava and all of that, but then it comes crashing down. And there can be negative reactions and everything. So you're right, we shouldn't think about kundalini. Let it rise because we're doing sincere spiritual practice, and not to bother about it. The mercury in the thermometer will go up. Or what we're trying to do is increase the heat that way. So yes, we shouldn't try to do any type of practice which is meant solely to excite or artificially raise the kundalini, because it can be dangerous that way, or we can have a negative reaction that way. Yeah, a good point.
When in this way, you talked about it yesterday also, so when you come down from the roof and you can see the whole world in different ways, permeated with Brahma, and you call it Vijnana. So that is a stage beyond Jnana, or beyond that realization. So I have two questions. One is, in Vishishtadvaita, which is coming from a totally different point of view, they say, if I understand it a little, it is the man, the Bhakta, the Bhagavan, and then the world, which Bhagavan itself has, himself or herself has become. There, the realization that everything around me is really God, is it faith-based or is it that Vijnana-based? Is it starting with faith-based and that is their realization, or what is the ultimate then for Vishishtadvaitins? Do they see everything permeated, and then how is it different from that Vijnana? And I have another question.
Okay, Sri Ramakrishna says that he doesn't use these terms, whether it's Dvaita or Visishta Dvaita or other, but he says for those following the path of devotion. So following a dualistic path. That ultimately all spiritual paths end in oneness. So from that point of view, he's in a Dvaita, we can say. Even though there may be dualistic paths, even the path of Jnana is dualistic in this sense. All end in oneness. If it's true that everything is oneness there, then coming back down, the state of mind that we have before we get to the roof will color our understanding of that experience when we come back into the mind. Because, we talked about the burnt string. the samskaras remain, the personality remains. It has all the same curves in it, but what's removed is the harmful element of it. So this is how Sri Ramakrishna, when he had the experience in the Kali temple, that as far as we understand, he was just merged in an ocean of consciousness and bliss. How as soon as the mind came down a tiny bit, he felt he had the vision of the Divine Mother. He explained in those terms, right? So it depends, I think, a bit on our spiritual attitude and understanding what our experience of the world is afterwards also. Because in that nirvikalpa state, there's nothing particular in it. All the particularity, as soon as we come back down, then personality is there, our mindset, worldview, everything is there. Of course, it's colored by that experience, but still, depending on our culture, depending on our language, depending on our religion, our spiritual tradition, all of those things, we'll understand it in a different way, and our worldview will be affected in a slightly different way. So we shouldn't expect everyone to be the same. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says they are all jackals howl alike. Right? That means on the roof. As soon as we come down, they'll all understand each other. I don't think there'll be too many quarrels. But those who get there without any real deep understanding, or suddenly or something, they may think that this is the only way to get there. And coming back down, that this is really what I saw. They were immersed in a state where there's no seeing or anything that way. So this also explains how we can have different religious traditions, started by saints and prophets and everything, who did have some real experience, but perhaps not the understanding that Sri Ramakrishna had. That the way that they got to the roof is only one of many possibilities. They may come back down and say, well, this is how I did it, this is how everyone should do it. So that's also possible. Yeah. Because so many religious traditions were started by great realized souls that don't have the same universality and catholicity that we find in Sri Ramakrishna. Because he went up, back and forth through all different methods and means, practiced all different spiritual traditions. He was unique that way. So even Shankaracharya, coming back down from that, he won't necessarily be talking to God, because he didn't have the mindset of the personal God as something so real. But he will see everything as Brahman that way. So there should be some variety, I would think, in the attitude, even for the Vijnani.
That's so beautiful, Maharaj. For the first time I understand that why you would think that the messages that Moses would give would be different from Muhammad or for that matter anyone else, because they are not leaving their original shell.
Yeah.
They went there, saw it, came back, but then their world and their rules of the game.
Mind is transformed, but not changed. I mean, it's the same mind.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, purified, and the element of that mind which led to bondage and all of it, and harmful attitude, that's gone. But still, see, Sri Ramakrishna, he had the same personality afterwards that he did before. The same likes, he liked the same food, the same sense of humor. So many things were the same, but with more sweetness. And if there was, of course, there was never any binding element. But if there was, all of that disappears.
But the selfishness will go away automatically.
That should go away.
Okay. The other part, what my question was, this you said, and he himself said, that what he has preached, everything is, of course, he didn't say that, but everything is in the scriptures. But he also went beyond that, he said that. So this idea of Vijnana, of coming back, it is, I know almost nothing about scriptures. So is it also stated there like that? Because I only hear that you reach there and nothing beyond that, and this world was here in a moment, it's all gone. But are there descriptions of...
Yeah, all of the whole Shakta philosophy is like that. You read even the songs of Ram Prasad. And, you know, walking around town, I'm circumambulating the Divine Mother. I see Mother has become everything. So if we have to pin it down to some type of Vada, some doctrine, then this would be, the closest will be the Mother worshippers, where they see everything as the play of Shakti, the Divine Mother. They see it that way. Of course, that would be their attitude from the beginning, also.
Maharaj, so you spoke about the idea of Ishwar Koti as Sri Ramakrishna saw it, and where again, this is what we were discussing, they can go up to that state where they merge with Brahman, but then they are still able to come back. And so it almost seems as if once they are back, there can be two ways of going about it. Either narrate their experiences, or and having narrated it, then teach the world also the different ways of going, or if they went through one way, just teach that method. Now, in the case of Swamiji also, when he had that experience, but then Thakur said, no, you have a different purpose, you should not be selfish and so on. So does that mean that one who, a knower of Brahman, or one who has experienced Brahman, has the authority to teach about Brahman, or is it that the authority to teach about Brahman, does it have to be, or do you necessarily have to have that experience?
Brahmanishta, someone's supposed to be established in Brahman. Now, we don't take that, I mean, theoretically, the ideal teacher will be someone who is a God-realized soul. But we take it as someone who is highly advanced in the spiritual path, someone who has no selfish motive, someone who is very pure of heart, someone who only cares for the welfare of others. They're qualified to teach. When Sri Ramakrishna said that you have to have this badge of authority, it's a very high standard. We take it, or the gurus take it, that Sri Ramakrishna is the real guru. He's the ultimate stamp of authority that way. So, if we restrict it to those who are Brahmagyanis, there won't be too many that way, or those who have had Nirvikalpa Samadhi, or those who are Ishvara Koti. It'll be a very rare thing. But those who are world teachers, gurus, or something, they have to have reached a certain stage of spirituality at least. And they have to have that perfect purity of heart, and they have to have no selfish motive for teaching, and they have to have a good understanding of the scriptures and everything. Whether they've had the direct experience or not, that we can expect that then there won't be too many to keep these traditions alive that way. But at least they've had some glimpse of these things.
This concept of many paths all leading to one place. So, Ramakrishna, of course, he taught it and experienced it himself. But before him, are there any teachers?
We have many teachers like that, and many verses from the Upanishads and other things. So all the rivers are coming, they all go into the ocean. So that idea is not a new idea with Sri Ramakrishna, but we never saw anyone before who practiced all of these things. And in the present age, and verified the truth of it and everything. But we have many traditions. All roads lead to Rome. That it's a very old idea. It goes way back to the Rig Veda in the Hindu tradition. That the truth is one, sages call it by different names. So it is a very old idea, but the special feature in Sri Ramakrishna's life is that he practiced these things, and not only within the Hindu tradition, but also the Sufi tradition. And of course, he didn't know anything about Buddhist tradition. We don't find it in other religions, and then he didn't exactly practice Christianity, but listened to the Bible and had that experience also. So he verified this truth. That wasn't original with him, but the emphasis that he gave to it was something. It was so strong. Even spiritual paths that were considered to be very dirty, filthy paths. He said, even this, some people, if they're sincere, and this is what their karma has brought them to, and they practice it that way, they can also realize God. But don't you do it. That every house has a back door where the scavenger comes to clean out the latrine. That's also an entrance into the house. But why go through that way? Go through the front door. Yeah.
Understanding this now in day-to-day practical life, do we have to be discouraged, or do you see promise? Because there is so much negativity. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, we can take it in one of two ways.
Yeah, I mean, like
one is that this world is going to hell. Let me try for my own realization that way. Yeah, it's disheartening. There's no question about that. When we see that rather than harmony and love for all people, that we're having more separation and all of that. Yeah, this is a question of how involved we want to be in the world. Do we want to protest things and everything, or do we find that it'll get the mind too upset? And we want to, go deeper in our spiritual practice. Do we want to balance them together? Yeah, it is disheartening to see when we see so much bloodshed in the name of religion, and so much anger and hatred towards immigrants and all of these things. Of course, it's very disheartening. So it doesn't make me feel good. It doesn't make me want to go deeper in meditation in order to isolate myself and forget everything. Yeah, no, it doesn't make me want to do that. But it makes me a little bit want to reach out to people more. If I see people who I see are living in fear, they may be gathered up and kicked out of the country. Or people who feel that everyone hates me. I'm wearing, hijab, something like that. It makes me feel that I want to smile at them and let them know that not everyone feels that way towards them. We can do little things like that. So we keep our spiritual practice, but it also has to reflect our attitude in the world and how we relate to people. And we do what we can to try to be a positive force. It's a question of balance. How much, if we get too affected by these external things, then we should, understand that our mind it won't be very positive for us. But for some people, we have to do something a little bit, and then we'll feel that at least, we're trying to be a force for good in the world. Yeah.
Swamiji, I have seen a person who is having highly egoistic as well as inferior complex. No, my question is, I have seen him behaving very differently. So, anything to do with these two qualities? Both egoism and inferior complex. Is it because of this, or they are connected with each other?
This ego is a very, very complex thing. And we find these two things very often go together. That we compensate, we overcompensate. We try to boost ourselves up, tell people how wonderful and how great we are, because deep down we feel that we're not very good. So sometimes this is a very natural thing that they go together. And we don't even understand it ourselves. It's not that we're consciously doing it. So the ego is a very complex thing. And really, This ego really means our personality, who we are, and the more we understand it, the more we can be free from the binding elements of it. Anyway.
So that is the way of overcoming. Because the experience very different. That's what I'm asking.
Yes. Of course, we should pay more attention to our own problems. Yeah. I mean, if we can somehow help somebody else that we see obviously is not happy with himself or herself, then good. But generally it's best, like Holy Mother said, that if we want to see anybody's faults, we have enough of our own to look at. Solve problems, solve our own problems. Those who are very well established in spiritual life, they can help others by their example. And if it's someone very close, and our own family member, children, something like that, then of course we can talk to them directly. But this ego is such a sensitive thing, very difficult to talk to other people about it. They'll say, you're not so perfect either.
I think I should know. Thank you.
This is this is a conversation I had with my friend about different paths that we have to reach God. So we kind of concluded that it's based on where each of us is in our stage of development. That kind of draws us to the path that we should to a particular path. So, going on what you said about reaching the roof and coming down, God realized souls coming back to teach others, and you said that they still retain their original personality. The harmful aspects they vanish. So, so my question is, the different paths that exist, is it because the God realized souls that come back, absent the harmful aspects, their personality still persists? So is it because of the different personalities that they preach the same truth that they saw from the roof differently, or is it because they customize their teachings in a way to reach a certain group of people? Because each of us, we are in different stages of development, and maybe we need to be shown the teachings in different ways. So to put it in short, my question is the reason for different lines of teaching, is it because the God realized souls who come back, they still have different personalities, or is it because they are preordained to present the same truth in different ways?
It depends on the caliber of the teacher. See, there may be some, and I'll say it's colored not so much by their experience on the roof, but by how they got up there. So there'll be some who, this is the path that got me there, this is what I know, this is what I'll teach to everybody. There'll be others, say Ramakrishna, something like that he'll have no agenda. Everyone has to be a worshipper of Mother Kali. See, he'll never say something like that. You'll see that each person has his or her own spiritual attitude and power of understanding and emotional nature, all of that, and give teachings that will suit each and every individual. That would be the best type of teacher. So it won't be a question of what got me there. Of course, in Sri Ramakrishna's case, he had all of these different things to draw from, because he knew all of the different paths that way. But even someone who doesn't know all of them, someone who's a perfect non-dualist should be able to tell somebody, no, you should practice worship, do some ritualistic worship, meditation won't be very suitable for you, do your japa. They should have that understanding that everyone is different. And of course, the more we can combine all of the different, the 4 yogas especially, the stronger it is in our spiritual life. But we'll also have generally something that we feel more comfortable with. And the best type of teacher will understand that and teach accordingly.
This is where I get a little confused, because then you wouldn't be having that many religions.
Sorry?
We wouldn't be having that many religions if
all the bondage and all the negativity and everything goes away after being on the roof. Then coming down, somewhere in the discourse it was mentioned. I'm a little confused then.
No, this variety in religion is a very important thing. One of Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. That this is the mother who knows that her children like fish in different ways and a different power of digestion, so she'll cook a different. They're all different cultures, they're all... the real problem with religion is not the founders of the religion, it's the people who follow them and distort the teachings and think that this is everyone has to think the way I think. This is the bigger problem. But there's no harm with the variety that we have. Only people shouldn't be forced to follow. Swamiji's idea was let everyone choose, let everyone be a sect unto himself.
Yeah.
As
many people.
So many sects. He didn't like this idea that he said you cut the cloth to fit the person. Everyone shouldn't have to try to fit into the same size jacket that way. So this is the nice element of Vedanta, this whole idea of Ishta Devata, that even within one family, I stayed with a family in Calcutta. I lived with them in their house. I rented some rooms from them. Father was a worshipper of Mother Kali. Mother was a worshipper of Shiva. So everything was Baba this, Baba that. Everything was Ma, Ma, Ma. And they had a little daughter who liked this Jagannath Puri.
Oh my.
Yeah. And so they would have everything for her. They encouraged her completely that way. And there was no strife or quarrel or anything. It was very a happy family together that way. If all religions had that idea, of course, it would be a nice thing.
And also sometimes all the books are now written long after the
Yes. And Sri Ramakrishna never says that every religion is true and perfect and there's nothing wrong. In fact, he says the opposite. He said that there are faults and errors and mistakes in every religion. That his point is that if someone sincerely practices, then it doesn't matter what it is. If they do it with real reverence and faith and devotion and everything, that they can have the highest type of realization. And they whatever they find in their scriptures and everything that are not up to the mark, they discard. Like the ant that comes to the hill with a mixture of sugar and sand, that it will only take the grains of sugar and leave the sand behind. So, shall we? Any more questions? Of course, we can discuss something downstairs.